And the webinar will be available within 3 to 5 business days. So if you're a member, you can access this at any time. If you're not, well, you should join. And if you've registered for this, you'll get an access link to go back and view it. And we will also have the transcript available for you as well. So if you didn't know already, EMA's memberships are now prorated as of July 1st. If you're not a member, which I see a fair amount of you are not, you can go and join at some of the rates at 50% off. It's enviromarkets.org/join. If you have any questions on what the best level is, feel free to reach out to me, Lauren at enviromarkets.org. And drum roll, please. EMA's 25th annual meeting will be in person. In fact, about 2 hours ago, I signed the contract for the venue, and we have a little fun video. Dun, 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 dun. Where's it going to be? Can anyone tell? We're going to be in Austin, Texas at the Driscoll Hotel on October 11th through the 13th. It's the 25th annual meeting. So you don't want to miss out. You need to be there. You need to be helping organize it, have your voice heard, get your ideas out. So if you're interested in being a part of the planning process, feel free to reach out to me. We're going to be sending an email out for committee members. If you'd like to speak, if you have a topic in mind, feel free to share. We have 3 months to make this happen. We're going to make it awesome. And we're super excited to see people in person all again. And we'll be doing all of the necessary COVID protocol and safety checks and all of that stuff to make sure that you are comfortable and obviously safe. So that's all I got. Do you want to take it over, Jack?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Hey, that's fantastic about Austin. I'd like to add, if anybody's curious, the Austin City Limits Music Festival is also that weekend. If anybody wants to get there a little bit early, have a little bit of fun. That was not a coincidence. We were thinking of you, the membership. It's not all work. You got to have a little fun as well. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see you guys in person. Again, it's been about 1.5 years for most of us. So I think the last time I spoke to the membership, I described a situation where we would shake hands, we would share a beer, and it looks like that time is coming sooner than later. But without further ado, guys, good afternoon. I am Jack Velasquez. Thanks for the introduction. Lauren, I work at Marex Spectron. I'm also the chairman of the Environmental Markets Association. And as always, you know, we have a lot of goals here at the EMA. And one of the goals is really to help our members learn about legislative changes and/or potential changes that might affect the market, pricing, supply and demand scenarios for renewable portfolio standards, RPSs. Now, RPSs change. Sometimes those changes are for the better. Depending on who you chat with, some of them are for the worse. The EMA's mission is to promote market-based solutions that help combat climate change. And we want to do this by promoting well-designed, stable environmental markets. In one way or another, we all professionally rely on these markets, be it you're a reporter, a trader, a broker, a marketer, or whatever your role may be. But chances are, if you're here joining us today, you do rely on this market. So if we're going to promote a market, again, we want to promote a stable, well-designed market. So today's webinar, titled Lifting the Lid on the Maryland Cap, right? In the first quarter of 2021, the state of Maryland introduced a lot of different changes into their legislative session. Now, this is not new. This happens in other states, and it's happened quite a bit recently, especially in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, now Maryland. Now, a few of these changes that Maryland introduced ultimately changed the RPS, either by inaction of the governor, by not signing a bill, or by good old-fashioned just going through the legislative process, SB 65. Some of the things that were changed: solar, black liquor, tier 2, wastewater thermal, geothermal carve out. You know, the question still resides, what are we doing with offshore wind, the OREC? So with that said we invited a diverse panel today to discuss those changes and how they, in their role and for their companies, manage these changes, right? So with that, I would like to introduce and welcome, we'll start off with Jonathan Brown. John works for Statkraft US LLC. John is the head of US Renewable Energy. He's held many roles in the industry over the last 15 years. He has a lot of experience on anything from the sell side to the buy side to the wholesale side. After John is done with his few minutes here introduction, we're going to move on to Chris Leveriza. Chris works at WGL Energy, affectionately known in the industry as Wiggle. Chris is the manager of electricity operations and renewable portfolio. He's also worked in the industry about a dozen years, and he's been at WGL for about a decade. Cleaning up, we're going to have Ken Nelson. Ken is the president and co-founder of Blue Delta Energy. I don't want to date Ken too bad, but he started in 1989. He's worked for many distinguished physical energy trading firms. Ken and his partner founded Blue Delta in 2014. They wear a lot of hats, anything from asset management to helping load servers procure their REC needs. So welcome everybody, and speakers, panelists. I really thank you for joining us today and helping the association. With that said, guys, we're going to kick it off. And as mentioned, John, if you're ready for us, buddy, we're going to start with you first.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack, for the introduction and for the good news for the upcoming EMA. I look forward to actually getting out and seeing some people here later this year. So, as Jack said, I am Jonathan Brown. I work at Statkraft. For those of you not familiar, Statkraft is the Norwegian state-owned utility. So we are 100% owned by the country of Norway. And our sister company, more people are familiar with Equinor or Statoil, but we are the utility side and are in renewable energy operations across Europe and Asia, and over the last couple of years have moved into the US, but more as a market integrator role rather than a developer, owner, operator in the US. And so my main job is providing financing and offtake opportunities for developers here in the US. And that's why Jack and EMA asked to have me speak, was to really speak more from the development supply side on these changes in Maryland and how we view them now and how we were viewing them during the process. And I have to say it's definitely an interesting time. It's not necessarily, even though we're on the supply side and everyone saw prices move up, you think immediately that it's a net positive for everyone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that immediately, because for a long time these changes were pending. And it takes a while for the market to react to that. It takes a while for market participants to be able to, identify what the new risks are to the market, whether this legislation is real, and identify what the probability of this is. And really we broke it down into 2 or 3 different pieces. When the legislation first came out was for our existing portfolio of development assets and offtake assets that we have. How did we view those? And just like with any open position, we looked at that in the sense of as the price moved up, hedging pieces of our offtake and taking risk off the table. At that time we didn't have a good outlook in terms of whether the legislation was going to pass, but this was already starting in 2020. And just like in any rally, you have to sell into it because there's liquidity in the market. Of course, where the difficulty comes in is the second piece, and that's for upcoming or new projects. And those are much more difficult to deal with because you see the higher prices and this potentially can make new projects pencil, but you don't know the likelihood at that time whether that new pricing will hold because you don't know if the legislation is going to pass. And so that's where it becomes very, very difficult to actually get new projects signed, built, and going when you have that basically don't have a crystal ball to really see what's going on in the market. And in that sense, it really puts a hold on new development projects as they're coming along. Obviously, as well as the market moves up, it becomes very difficult for other market participants, and it'll be interesting to hear Chris's perspective on this as a load server with as a regulated entity. When you have alternative compliance payments for an existing market, and then you actually have the market trading above where those alternative compliance payments are, it may be difficult for some market participants to react to those changes and to be able to participate in those markets when some participants, some speculators, some market makers are able to transact at those higher prices, but some of the regulated load servers may not be able to. And so it causes this big liquidity gap in the market, which is sometimes makes it hard for sellers then to be able to really put on hedges and lock in the revenue that we see. And so this has been, generally pretty interesting for us to go through and witness. Obviously from the generator or from the developer side, it was a favorable outcome in terms of higher pricing. For those of you not familiar, Maryland is a very difficult state to develop solar or just develop renewable energy facilities in general. There are a lot of permitting environmental concerns that people have to go through. A lot of utility scale developers end up developing projects there and then never develop again because it's just so difficult and sometimes very, very costly. Even with the higher REC pricing, still very costly. The types of projects that we've seen that have been successful have been more community solar projects, and that's partially because there are easier siting processes to go through for community solar. The projects usually aren't as efficient as utility scale, so that's the trade-off. But in return, they're able to get retail rates a lot of times, so that helps offset the higher costs. And so I think a lot of the demand that's going to be met in the future from the RPS probably will be more from the community solar side and less from the utility scale side. Along with this, of course, we saw the overall RPS demand dropped for the solar products. And this was a compromise because previously, and without going into the actual supply and demand numbers, I wanted to spare everyone having to actually go through supply and demand because there's a lot of different ways to make that sausage. And the general gist of it is that it was very undersupplied to begin with. Now it is still undersupplied, but less so. And so we went from a very unreasonable gap that we would never be able to develop enough solar in the next 5 to 7 years to a more reasonable gap, but still I feel like an unbridgeable gap that most likely Maryland will not be able to hit in the next 2 to 3 years. Depending on which way you actually forecast the supply and demand and how you forecast the bank, you're looking at anywhere from 300 to 400 megawatts of utility scale that would need to be built, anywhere from 400 to 500 to 600 megawatts of community solar that would need to be built in the next 2 to 3 years, just to give some rough numbers. And historically, there's never been more than 100 megawatts of utility scale solar built in Maryland in any given year. To put it in another perspective, the highest amount of solar that was ever built in Massachusetts, which has a much more developed solar program than Maryland, was 200 megawatts. So having 300 or 400 come online in the next 1 to 2 years seems very, very unlikely, especially given that it's a very difficult market space to develop in. So the likelihood that it's going to be short does seem pretty high, even with these higher prices. So, my view on it is that this will cause some projects that were sitting on the margin, maybe weren't quite able to get there because of higher legacy costs from permitting or siting issues or non-adjacent sites for the development. This may push those projects to be able to be completed and developed and get their long-term hedges, their long-term revenue hedges in place, but it may not solve all the issues for Maryland unless they get their permitting and siting really cleaned up within the state and on a local level. And that's something that this RPS didn't necessarily address, and it is a difficult problem to address at a state level because it's a lot more localized than the governor can necessarily tackle. But in general, we're still very happy, obviously, again, on the supply side to see what happened. It's definitely a positive for solar generation in the state. And then of course, Chris is going to speak to this a little bit more, but the removal of black liquor in the tier 1 was something I've watched try to go through for the last 15 years, and it never seemed to be able to get removed from the RPS. So I honestly thought it would never happen, but it actually did. And so, I think that's something that's been long overdue. And, we're happy to see the continued strength in the other markets because of it. So that's been our experience. And, I'll be happy to take more questions, surrounding the solar markets and what our outlook is after everyone gets a chance to speak. So
great, John. Thank you. That was really good. All right, let's hear from the buy side. Maybe somebody that's not so happy. No, kidding. But great to hear the development side did well. Chris, if you can please share a little bit of your opinions and thoughts on how SB 65 affected you in your role. We'd be
sure.
glad
Yeah.
to hear.
I just want to apologize first for if my video looks weird. I spilled coffee on my computer a couple of weeks ago. Can never get it fixed by IT, so pandemic problems. But so I'm on my iPhone, so I apologize if it looks weird. So thanks for kicking it over, Jack. My name is Chris Leveriza. I'm the manager of electricity operations and the renewable portfolio at WGL Energy Services. I just want to make that distinction. So we are the retail arm of WGL Energy, and our parent company is AltaGas in Canada. And WGL, as you know, Wiggle is the gas utility. So, we're the subsidiary where we sell retail electricity and retail natural gas. My role there is managing, on the electricity operations side of things. I don't want to get too much into that, but scheduling the power, pricing out retail contracts, bidding RFPs, like larger RFPs, and that's certainly where RECs come into play, and REC pricing. And then on the renewable side, I manage our RPS portfolio and our voluntary wind portfolio. So, I've been trading Maryland RECs for a little while now. This is my 10th year at WGL ES. Prior to that, I was at a smaller retail shop, and then I was on the wholesale side actually at Integrous Energy Services. I guess really kind of like a spec desk where we were trading, ice spreads and virtuals and some pretty cool stuff early on. It's kind of like pre-credit crisis when things were a bit more fluid. But I've been at this company now for 10 years, and working on the trading side of things, like just what John alluded to. From my perspective, working for a subsidiary of the regulated arm, we are certainly more limited in certain things we could do in the market. From a positional standpoint, just from a taking a view standpoint, we want to make sure like our number one priority is risk management, making sure that we are pricing our customers and hedging our customers so that they are getting good prices for their deals for the retail energy contracts. Just to jump in, so that's introduction, I guess, jumping into just the perspective of an LSC. I've kind of been on both sides of it. We're working for a smaller LSC and a larger LSC. I'm not going to necessarily focus on the trading aspect of it right now, but just some of the things as an LSC that we look out for and that we can control beyond trading the market. Certainly from break it down to 3 categories. One is the legislative process. Number 2 is customer contracts. That's inclusive of legacy contracts, and number 3 is just the customer. So in terms of the legislative process, I'm pretty fortunate at WGL in terms of just us having the ability to have kind of like an in-house regulatory expert. We have a guy named Tony. He's a regulatory manager. He stays on top of things in terms of watching bills that are proposed in different states. We serve load in Maryland, DC, Pennsylvania, Ohio. So just like Maryland, there's multiple bills that are being proposed every year. And to get a sense of, what's real or not, beyond my interfacing with, guys like Jack and Ken, in terms of just hearing what's been going on, Tony and our regulatory team are really on top of what bills are out there and what is actually getting support on the local level. Local politics plays a big role in whether or not a bill is actually passed. So we do work with, I do work with the regulatory manager, and we do have a lobbyist for WGLES. He does work on not just RPS, obviously, but electricity, natural gas as well. And he interfaces directly with Tony. But within the legislative process, when a committee hears a bill or has hearings for a bill, I'm sure most of you are aware of this. There's just an opportunity for public comments or written arguments or testimony, and that's something that if a bill is going to affect our customers, like this black liquor bill or like the black liquor bill in the past in DC, we're going to explicate how it affects our customers, and our recommendations just from a customer contract standpoint, what's in their best interest. We don't necessarily take positions opposing bills. That's not, that's not our role. But like with the DC black liquor, for example, in 2014, we were active in providing written and oral testimony just on, what we thought was appropriate just from a legacy contract standpoint, and what the impacts would be to customers if legacy contracts weren't allowed, and how that would affect their electricity rates. I guess the second category would be our topic that we look at for just communication with customers. From a transactional standpoint, when a bill is given serious consideration, and that's not just talking to brokers and other traders in the market, but also from a regulatory side, if there is local support, if something really has legs, we start communicating those potential impacts to our customers via our salespeople and our business development managers. One example of this was the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019, which increased the RPS target to 50% by 2030, and the solar carve out to 14.5%. But so that had a significant impact to our retail customers. They were looking at anywhere from $2 to $4 of increase in their rates after that, after the bill was passed. So prior to, and a lot of suppliers did this as well. You can see it advertised on a couple of websites. But prior to that bill actually being signed and the bill having already been passed by the Senate and the House, you have that 30-day period where Governor Hogan can either just let it sit, he can veto it, he can sign it. But there's this opportunity where there's a high likelihood of the bill passing, and we, along with other suppliers, you take that opportunity to give your customers a heads up, like, look, this bill has just been passed, it hasn't been signed yet. In this specific case with the Clean Energy Jobs Act, there was a deadline of October 1st, where if you signed the contract prior to that, your contract would be considered a legacy contract, and you'd essentially be get the benefits of the old RPS. So that was another way that we, kind of watching the RPS closely, we're able to help our customers, lock in lower rates. And lastly is, just talking about contracts, is just having strong contract language. We have a strong legal team in terms of just having dealt with RPS over the years in Maryland and in DC in particular. Interfacing with the PUC is also very important. I've had personal experiences where I've done deals where certain aspects, I guess I'll give a specific example, like PA Tier 2 and PA Solar recently closed off the borders for eligibility. While this was happening, I had a couple contracts in place, and I reached out to the PUC directly, and they were very helpful in terms of I gave them details about specific rec packages, and they were able to provide insight on whether or not, on an unofficial basis, whether or not something qualified. So really being proactive, working with the PUC, having strong contract language, and also just being aware of different processes in place. Pennsylvania, for example, required a petition process for certain rec packages, like if you want to get it approved. So this isn't a comprehensive list of kind of what we look out for, but these are some of the bigger ticket items of, coming from the perspective of an LSC, just how we look out for our customers' best interest.
Thanks, Chris. You know, I'm really glad you touched on one topic, and I'll just give something the audience to ponder. You know, a lot of us approach these markets with models on supply and demand and how to try to predict price movement. Some for different reasons. Some speculate the markets. Some service clients. Some are sellers, and they want to know what their forward revenue stream is. But there is a lot of truth to that short period of time when it's the high likelihood of becoming a bill. And now that it's in arrears, I can share that there were a lot of deals happening between black liquor generators that were, at the time, I believe it was $13 for Maryland Tier 1, and potentially having it drop to a green E price, which at the time was about $3. So it made a lot of sense to call a load server and to get a deal done at a value somewhere between 4 and 13, right? Load server gets a deal, black liquor seller gets something better than $3 to $4 for green E. But the really difficult part is, and that I want you guys to ponder, is how do I measure supply and demand? Is that black liquor been removed? Has it been tied up for the next 5 years at a value that I'll never know? Is Chris ever going to share his deal book with me? Probably not. So that's some of the unknowns that we will never know, and GATS is not going to tell us. So with that said, just a little bit of thought. Ken, I'll hand it over to you, my friend.
Sure. And I will say one thing regarding the never know. The state of Maryland is very good. If you ever go to their annual report that they file to the legislature as a summary of the RPS, you can learn a lot of information about the specific recs that were used to comply for each individual compliance year. So we may not know in advance, but we may learn a lot just by looking at the reports that the Maryland PSC prepares. So anyways, I've got a presentation, but really we can skip to the highlights are really to cover that this was a really active legislative session. Obviously, we've been talking quite a bit about SB 65, the bill that passed and did most of the changes that we're all talking about, the SREC requirement changes, the ACP, the removing of black liquor, the reinstitution of the Tier 2 program. And Lauren, can you skip over those slides? Go to the next one. Here you go. No, this one. Go back. Can you go back one? There we go. So there were several other bills that passed as well. Interestingly enough, one was a introduction of a geothermal carve out as part of Tier 1 compliance, which will be interesting to see. You know, we've been very active in thermal energy technologies. We're a member of the Renewable Thermal Collaborative and work with a number of wastewater districts. So between this bill and then also HB 561, the thermal energy from wastewater treatment, which is something that DC had added a few years ago. We're looking at some, inclusion of newer technologies, which is something, as RPSs grow and over time, they start trying to incorporate new technologies and figuring out the appropriate way to do so, whether it's as a Tier 1, as a carve out with a separate ACP structure. Those are all things, obviously, that we pay attention to. And then it's not a minor point that the municipal compliance was capped at 20.4% going forward. But those were the bills that were actually enacted. But really, I think we can learn as much from the bills that weren't enacted. Next slide, please. And this was some interesting jockeying early on in the session regarding the possibility of moving towards a clean energy standard as opposed to a renewable energy standard. Governor Hogan actually had supported the CARES Act that would have added nuclear to the RPS. And we also saw other bills introduced that would do this something similar. Didn't gain much traction this session, but politically, we see at least where certain parties are interested. And as we all know that there's discussions on a federal level regarding a clean energy standard, maybe we'll see something where they bring the Maryland program more in line with what the federal government might be thinking we'll see. But it was interesting to see the governor, actively campaigning to increase to include nuclear. Then, of course, we all know about the black liquor exemption. At the same time, we've been watching for the last few sessions, well, actually many sessions, there's been a real push to eliminate the waste to energy tier from tier 1. There are waste energy projects as tier 1 resources. And it didn't pass this session, but just because it didn't pass this session doesn't mean that it won't come back again and again and again. There's obviously a big component of environmental justice on this one, because it's basically the waste energy projects must be within the state of Maryland to qualify. So some of the lower income areas where those waste to energy, the municipal solid waste burning plants are, this is one of those topics similar to black liquor. We're going to basically say it can't happen until it does. And then just a final note on the biomass from non-animal manure or thermal resources from non-animal manure. There's a big push to increase biomass and other thermal resources. Something that we're watching. We'll see where it leads. It didn't get much traction, but once again, this is something that is, these bills don't come to pass a lot of times when they're first introduced. So we'll see what they continue to pop up. And then next slide, please. These are some other bills that were introduced that I thought might be of interest to the EMA membership, and really the Climate Solutions Now Act is obviously has a lot of things going on with RGGI spending, greenhouse gas reduction targets, et cetera. But the one I thought was pretty fascinating was the fact that the HB 1327 was a bill that was introduced with support from NRG that would basically redefine standard offer service auctions and remove the utility default service to a lottery system similar to what Texas has in place, where the retail energy providers would be assigned those customers that do not make a choice regarding their service provider. Basically, from what I've read, this was a shot across the bow in Maryland that NRG especially is hoping to introduce into the other PJM and even New England states. A real push to move away from default utility service to require the load move towards the deregulated service providers. And then a couple other fun ones, the Future Act, we'll see where that leads. The Maryland Green Bank, there was an attempt to formally establish one. These are all things that obviously have impacts on developers, especially when they're looking at how the colleges and universities might need to procure, or will there be a green bank program similar to what we see in Connecticut and New York? But like I said, these didn't go this session, but especially like with 1327, this was the first time it was introduced, and I think there's a real thinking that we're going to reintroduce this next session and the next session and see if it gets some traction as we go forward. So with that, I guess maybe we should open it up for some questions, or however you want to handle it, Jack.
Awesome, Ken. Thank you. I have a few questions. I don't know if anybody in the crowd does. Doesn't seem so. But John, my first question is for you with regards to the Maryland Solar. As Chris mentioned earlier, there was a time frame where it seemed, at least in the marketplace, like this legislation was going to pass. We saw trades occur very near the cap, at times over the cap that was in place. So from your aspect, that's got to be a little bit of an oh snap moment, right? Is that a hit the brakes moment for you guys? Let's see what's going on. It's kind of going my way. Or is that a, let's sell with two hands at this point, because maybe it won't go through. But what's like an internal discussion look like around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hope that I have I wish that I had a nice way to say how that internal discussion looked. There's obviously a lot of moving pieces that occur when that happens. You can imagine risk in general. Risk departments look at that where they're assuming this alternative compliance payment, which is legislatively set, caps risk in certain markets, and credit also looks at it as a risk mitigation factor, from our offtake agreements that now is in question. So all of a sudden your credit risk might blow out depending on who your offtakes are with. So there's a lot of different discussions that are going on all at the same time, not just related to, market transactions. Yeah, I mean, I think what happens at that point, and obviously this evolves over time, so it's not like it happens overnight where it goes from trading below the ACP to at the ACP to through the ACP. And as you do that, you're looking, the market basically is broadcasting what it believes to be the probability of that bill going through. And we look at that the same way, is that, okay, now if we're trading at the ACP, what is our feelings, what is our sense, and Chris discussed this a little bit. They have an in-house regulatory person that can give them kind of a weighting in terms of which direction and how the bill is going to go. We have to rely on external sources, consultants to give us that, and then we can discuss that internally and say, do we believe that? Do we not believe that? Because we don't have an in-house person to give us that kind of feedback. But it is a difficult one. At the end of the day, we have to look at it as we're not speculating in terms of whether that bill is going to go through. We are looking to lock in the revenues on the offtake and financing that we've already provided. So as long as we're hitting our internal rate of return and our return on an investment, then we should be doing the transaction and not necessarily holding out to capture a few extra dollars. And of course, everybody wants to sell the top, but realistically, that's not the business we're in. So I've always tried to caution people to say, okay, let's not wait to see if this thing goes higher. If it's at a price that makes sense for us internally and we're all happy with it, then do the trade and move on.
All right, so bulls make money and bears make money. I like it. Chris, I have a question for you. And so black liquor had so many pump fakes in Maryland. Like Ken mentioned, it was on the docket so many times. I think it might have been 2 years ago where it literally survived by one vote. And I know you explained you have a regulatory policy guy who has his feet on the ground, but ultimately it does get removed. Certainly there's some grandfathering that will be allowed for existing contracts. So is this an all hands on deck meeting? I'm like, all right, guys, what gets grandfathered? Can we quantify this number? Or is there an assumption of let's just start from scratch and manage it and see what the market does as we move forward?
From the perspective of like what we currently own, like from our own book?
Yeah, exactly.
We base a lot of that. I think with this time around, we had the benefit of working through the DC bill that eliminated black liquor in 2014. So we were certainly a lot more confident this time around when it came to just kind of the direction it was going to go. I mean, to be honest, like I really wasn't that worried just because of the premise that DC set. And like Ken, actually, you and I actually probably hooked up on a couple of DC deals and worked through some of the language there. All indications were that, Maryland would somewhat follow suit. And then also working through like just PJM in general, just with Pennsylvania recently, Pennsylvania Solar, a lot of the groundwork was already laid. So, we could follow that. And, with our regulatory people who, were kind of keyed in on what was going on and took opportunity to kind of voice their concerns. Having that mechanism, certainly made us confident that, at least for what was in our book, we would be okay.
Awesome. Well, while I have you, Chris, and it's one that's really been boggling my mind for a while, and that is the offshore wind. Right. I believe an OREC does exist in Maryland, at least legislatively in the RPS, but there is no offshore wind. So any recent developments on offshore wind or your expectations going forward on this type of technology?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most recent occurrence was the round 2 of the assignment of leases that opened up. I think that just closed in June. That was a confidential auction or a confidential process, but like Ørsted did bid in a unit called Skipjack 2. So this is coming from the 2019, sorry, I'm blanking on this, Clean Energy Jobs Act, where they increased the footprint or for offshore wind to 1,400. So they increased the offshore wind carve out to 1,200. I'm sorry, by 2030. So some of the things that occurred from there, they did cap the OREC values for round 2, and so that just closed up on June 21st. I think forward-looking, I'll kind of take the cue from, and granted, he was talking his own book, but the CEO of US Wind, who has one of the projects, Marwin Wind, was interviewed recently, and just some of the kind of forward-looking things he alluded to, kind of big picture, that are certainly optimistic for offshore wind. On an ISO level, New Jersey and PJM recently collaborated where they're actually taking offshore wind into their regional transmission planning. So that's like a first sign for the industry. So just from a morale standpoint, that was big for offshore wind. That was around New Jersey, but just in general, the industry, certainly celebrated that. PJM retirements, they're going to retire around 6 gigawatts of coal units, or of units over the next 3 to 4 years, and 92% of that is coal. So there's certainly an opportunity from a generator replacement standpoint for offshore wind to kind of step in there. So they're certainly in a good place. I think there's still have to deal with a lot of the bureaucracy involved. The 2 units are actually still being reviewed. Skipjack and Marwin are still being reviewed by BOEM, the Ocean Energy Management, the branch of the Department of Interior. So it is a long drawn out process. The initial bill was passed in 2013, and it took this long to get to this point, but there's certainly momentum at this point for them.
Hey, Chris, as I understand it, if they do finally get an OREC, that reduces the compliance obligation for Tier 1. It's basically like if ORECs start showing up, compliance entities have less Tier 1 to buy.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it is to be a carve out of the Tier 1. Yeah. And I think the timeline right now is 2024 and 2026 for those, for those units to go tentatively live. So it could be a little bit of time.
Ken, you had mentioned a geothermal carve out in Maryland, and I should probably know this, but that was news to me just now. Can you describe a little bit more? For one, what is a geothermal rec, and what is this carve out looking like?
Well, ground source heating and cooling, we banner the term geothermal, but a lot of people out west think of geothermal. They think of Ormat and some of those big, huge steam where they drill into the ground. This is more for residential and commercial ground source heating and cooling. And it actually has been incorporated in the Tier 1 as an eligible technology for quite a while now. But it hasn't really probably brought the results that the industry was hoping. I think they're really trying to support more deployment of ground source heating and cooling. So what they're doing now is they're creating a separate carve out in the Tier 1 specific for geothermal or ground source heating and cooling. It's not a huge carve out. I think it's like 0.15%. I'm not sure what it escalates to. And I personally, I don't even know what the ACP, if it's been set at a separate level. I'm assuming it has been. But it's, it's one of those technologies that a lot of people, especially the electrification movement, want to support when they're looking at how to, we've looked in New England and other places where they're trying to decarbonize thermal energy and ground source heating and cooling, both from an economic perspective with jobs, as well as decarbonizing a segment of the economy that is struggling with how to do so.
Thanks, Ken. John, question for you. So you'd mentioned that a lot of the obstacles facing the development of Maryland solar was really, getting through the environmental impact study, getting that interconnection agreement, getting through the bureaucracy of the permits. And all that doesn't really sound like a price hurdle, but we increased the pricing. I'm going to assume that these bureaucratic hurdles still exist. Now, it sounds to me like people are going to make a lot of money on this, but is this going to promote more solar? Or is there something going on that's going to ease the process to get some solar built? Is this higher cap magically going to get us another 1,000 megawatts?
Yeah, Jack, thanks. I suppose I was alluding at that, at my general pessimism. And that's coming from somebody that, we're participating more on the generator cell side of things. So in general, we should be happy about it. But you're right. I mean, obviously money doesn't fix everything. It fixes some issues. Sometimes with siting or environmental issues, you end up making a less efficient site for your solar project, which may yield higher legacy costs that have to be embedded into the project, which you then need to get back in revenue. So having higher pricing, higher alternative compliance payments may allow you to capture that. You may literally have just not been able to make a project actually pencil when you do 15 years of energy plus 15 years of RECs, and now that may be possible. But it doesn't, as you mentioned, it doesn't solve all the issues. It doesn't solve the bureaucracy and the permitting issues. It does alleviate some of the concern. And I can't say that there is anything specifically in play, because it's not really something that can be addressed at a state level. To a certain extent, a lot of these permitting and environmental issues are actually at the county level, so it has to be addressed more on a local basis. The leadership could come from the state to address some of these more local issues, but it's not necessarily going to come through in like a legislative session to fix the problems. So I hesitate to say that somebody's going to make. I suppose somebody is making a lot of money. I'm not sure who yet. If you happen to be sitting completely merchant on an existing Maryland solar facility and you had done no hedging up until when this bill came about, then yes, you made a good amount of money speculating on that. I would imagine most generators out there do not do that and just sit. But I suppose there may have been some that were under hedged or less hedged. And as I mentioned before, I still think that, probably the biggest opportunities for community solar, where a lot of times because of the design of their projects and their ability to go on rooftops, they're less efficient projects, they're more expensive projects, but they're able to capture that retail rate. And now they have this great upside of even higher solar pricing for the RECs. And I think that's where a lot of opportunity is going to exist. But of course, those are not going to come at utility scale sizes. You might see 5, 10, 15 megawatts aggregated over multiple sites rather than 80 and 100 megawatt sites being built on a utility scale at a higher efficiency. And typically there's anywhere between 5 to 7% difference of capacity factor between utility scale and community solar. So, I think we're gonna keep chipping away at what's there, and as I said, I think it is going to release some more supply. I just still am a bit pessimistic, given that as I mentioned before, we have 300 to 400 of utility scale, maybe 400 to 500 of community solar that would need to be built over the next 1 to 2 years. I think it's unlikely that that kind of logjam can be cleared that quickly. But within 4 or 5 years, yeah, I think it's possible. Especially if everything stays relatively consistent, and of course the supply chain for solar panels and trade wars and all that stays manageable, which under this administration may or may not happen. So
amazing. Thanks, John.
Hey, Jack, did you see the question that came in the Q&A?
I did not, but thank you for pointing it out. And Lauren, if you don't mind grabbing that one, I don't have mine.
I'll put it in the chat for you. How about that? It's from Joe, and it's for Chris on offshore wind, so it's coming your way.
All right, expanding on the offshore wind, when do you think suppliers will need to include the OREC obligation in load bid deals? Will the Maryland PUC tell suppliers when to include it, or do suppliers wear the risk of having the OREC obligation when the project gets developed?
If you don't have good contract language, you certainly wear that risk. But I think, most suppliers, retail suppliers have, change in law, very explicit change in law language that, allows them to pass through that RPS cost because, it's not realized yet. I mean, like you can vouch for this, Jack, like there's no OREC market yet, right? There's nothing being traded. So we can't hedge for anything. So, up until that point where there's a tradable market and there's actually a mechanism for hedging and it actually wrecks in the market, I don't think this is something that retail suppliers will be including in their rates. Unless you're really ambitious and just have some super model and.
All right. This is a question really for the panel, and this could benefit looking out for a danger from the buy side or looking for an opportunity. And again, it's really for anybody to answer. Where is the next potential windfall or pitfall in Maryland? Ken, I know you touched a little bit on it, but what should I be worried about, or what should I be looking for opportunistically?
Well, I'll say this really quick, and I'm sure most everyone on the phone probably is aware of this, but Maryland is unique in the PJM triumvirate, if you will, in the sense that you can wheel power in from outside the PJM footprint to qualify as a Maryland Tier 1 resource. So if you sink your power in from, say, a MISO wind farm, you're eligible to get this uplift of this REC. So I've always viewed Maryland Tier 1 as sort of it's really the only program that can increase supply based on higher prices to cover the transmission. The others, let's face it, it is what it is, when it comes to tri-quals and PJM cited wind or landfills with New Jersey or Pennsylvania. But Maryland has this unique ability to attract more. So, as you see prices moving up, always keep in the back of your mind that Maryland could, one of the interesting things that I'm sure if you look at that RPS report I mentioned earlier, is that the Tatanka wind farm in North Dakota is one of the, annually one of the larger sources of supply for Maryland Tier 1. So, it's just something to keep in mind as prices move, that, if you're an economist and you say supply responds to to price, Maryland is really the only market where that actually can happen in the short run.
Fantastic. Does anybody else from the audience have any questions? We have about 4 minutes to go here. I just, don't be shy if you do. If not, don't worry. I'm full of them today. Most people say I'm full of it anyway.
I've got a question for Ken if no one has a question, but I'll let the audience. Ken, you mentioned the MSW bill. I guess what do you think is the likelihood of that? It seems like there's one local politician in particular who's been trying to push that for years, but there's a lot of the same elements as black liquor, just in terms of just the locality of the plants. You have 2 big plants out there. So there's the jobs issue, and so it's a higher percentage of MSW that's actually in Maryland, but it's also a lower percentage overall of what contributes to like the total RECs that are used for compliance. I think it's around like 10%, but just, want to get your take on that.
Sure. And the politics constantly change as the situation changes. Black liquor, I think we all know the reason why it finally died was because the Luke mill that was, the labor wing of the Democratic Party had been in favor of black liquor just because there was a union plant in Maryland that was still operating. And in 2019, when that plant shut down, the labor argument dissipated to an extent. Then no longer was Maryland supporting Maryland jobs; it was supporting jobs in Virginia, and it was easier to to basically finally put black liquor out of the equation. MSW, the real question is, we're seeing so much more thought behind equity and inclusion and economic or environmental justice. Those arguments, we're all, I think, seeing them in a lot of areas of our lives these days. There's much more of a focus. I don't know if that's enough to overcome the other economic interests with MSW. Obviously, there's just even waste processing, but then there's also the economic side of the jobs and such that those plants create. I'm not thinking that it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think, as I say, we're going to revisit this every year, and I think it's going to inch towards probably the middle of the decade. I wouldn't be surprised if we go through the same slow but steady progression towards elimination.
Great, guys. We have 1 minute left. Lauren, if you want to bring us home, I really appreciate everybody's time today. And I thank you for joining us. I thank you guys, the panelists, for giving us your insight and your daily plans, your yearly plans. I appreciate it. And I think that's about it, folks.
Wow, with a minute to spare, Jack, way to go. You timed that perfectly. Just as a reminder, EMA memberships are prorated. If you're not a member yet, go ahead and go to enviromarkets.org/join, check out the different levels, and that will set you up for an even better rate at our annual meeting, which will be in person in Austin, Texas on October 11th through the 13th. If you have any ideas for future webinars or for the annual meeting, feel free to reach out, Lauren at enviromarkets.org. Thank you so much for your time. And you all have a great evening. And until next time, we are EMA. Come back.
Yeah, thanks, guys.